Donald Trump is absolutely spiraling right now after a federal judge just delivered what might be the most devastating legal blow of his entire presidency. And what makes this even more shocking is that Trump's own administration officials, people he personally appointed, are the ones who got caught red-handed violating a court order. A whistleblower came forward with evidence. A federal judge found probable cause for contempt. And now Trump's authority to conduct deportations has been completely frozen while courts investigate whether his administration knowingly and willfully defied a federal judge's direct order. This is massive. This is the kind of story that changes everything. And I'm going to break down exactly what happened here, because this is not some minor procedural issue. This is Trump's administration allegedly committing contempt of court. But real quick, before we get into this, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built National Brief Network to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, please subscribe to our channel because you might think you are but aren't. Your subscription actually matters here. All right, let's get back to the story. So here's what just happened. Judge James Boasberg, a federal judge in Washington, D.C., just found probable cause to believe that the Trump administration willfully violated his court order. Not accidentally, not by mistake, willfully, meaning they knew about the order, they understood what it said, and they violated it anyway. How do we know this? Because a whistleblower came forward. Someone inside the Trump administration, someone who witnessed what was happening, came forward and provided evidence to the court that Trump administration officials, possibly including Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, knowingly defied Judge Boasberg's order. And let me be really clear about what that means. This whistleblower is alleging that Trump's people looked at a federal court order, said, "We don't care," and proceeded to violate it anyway. That is contempt of court. That is one of the most serious legal violations you can commit. That is the kind of thing that can result in massive fines, sanctions, and even criminal penalties. Now, let me bring the receipts because we always back up what we say with hard facts. Let me walk you through exactly what happened here, step by step, so you understand just how serious this actually is. Back in March 2025, Judge Boasberg issued a court order about how the Trump administration could conduct deportations of Venezuelan migrants. The order was specific. The order laid out procedures that had to be followed. The order was legally binding, and according to the whistleblower who came forward, the Trump administration sent 137 deportation flights carrying Venezuelan migrants after that court order took effect. 137 flights. Think about that number for a moment. This wasn't one or two flights where maybe someone made a mistake. This was 137 flights. This was a systematic operation. And the whistleblower is alleging that administration officials knew these flights violated the court order. The whistleblower is alleging they proceeded anyway. The whistleblower is alleging this was willful and intentional. Now, Judge Boasberg looked at the evidence the whistleblower provided and he said, "There is probable cause here to believe contempt occurred." That's a legal finding. That's a federal judge saying, "Based on the evidence I've seen, there's reason to believe the Trump administration committed contempt of court." And Boasberg didn't stop there. He scheduled hearings for December 15th and 16th. He was going to bring Trump administration officials into court. He was going to force them to testify under oath. He was going to get to the bottom of who knew what and when they knew it. He was going to investigate whether this was willful contempt. But then something happened. Right before those hearings were supposed to happen, the Trump administration ran to the appeals court. They filed an emergency motion, and they claimed that forcing executive branch officials to testify would violate executive privilege. Now let me explain what they're really doing here. Notice what Trump's team is actually saying. They're not saying we didn't violate the order. They're not saying the whistleblower is lying. They're saying you can't investigate us because executive privilege protects us from having to answer questions. Think about that for a moment. A whistleblower comes forward with evidence of contempt. A federal judge finds probable cause. The judge schedules hearings to investigate. And Trump's response is, "You can't make us testify about what we did." Does that sound like the response of innocent people to you? Does that sound like the response of an administration that has nothing to hide? And here's what's even more concerning. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals actually agreed to pause the investigation. They issued what's called a stay. They said we need to think about these executive privilege questions before the lower court can proceed. So right now, the contempt investigation is on hold. Judge Boasberg cannot proceed with those hearings. He cannot force Trump administration officials to testify. He cannot continue his investigation. Everything is frozen while the appeals court thinks about whether executive privilege applies here. And that means the whistleblower's evidence is just sitting there. The allegations of willful contempt are just sitting there. And Trump's people are hiding behind executive privilege to avoid having to answer questions under oath. Now, the Trump administration does have a defense they're trying to use here, and I want you to hear what they're actually claiming, because it's absurd. They're claiming that these 137 deportation flights were already in motion when the court order took effect. They're claiming the planes were already airborne. They're claiming that once planes are in the air, you supposedly can't call them back. Let me just point out how ridiculous that defense is. You're telling me that 137 planes, just happened to all be in the air at the exact moment the court order took effect? You're telling me that's just a coincidence? You're telling me there was no way to ground any of those flights once the order came down? Come on, nobody believes that. That defense is laughable. And here's what makes it even worse. The Trump administration is also trying to claim they have authority under something called the Alien Enemies Act. This is a law from 1798, yes, 1798, and it's still on the books, you heard that right, 1798, that supposedly gives the president broad powers to deport foreign nationals during wartime or national emergencies. But here's the problem with that argument. We're not at war with Venezuela. Venezuelan migrants are not enemy combatants. This is not a military situation. The Alien Enemies Act doesn't apply here, and legal scholars across the political spectrum have said that Trump's interpretation of this law is completely wrong. But Trump doesn't care. Trump is claiming he has authority under this ancient law that doesn't even apply to this situation, and he's using that as an excuse to violate a federal judge's order. Think about what that means. Trump is essentially saying, I can do whatever I want and no judge can stop me, because I claim to have authority under this law that gives me unlimited power. That is authoritarian behavior. That is the behavior of someone who doesn't believe courts can constrain him. That is the behavior of someone who thinks he's above the law. Now, I want to talk about this whistleblower for a moment because what this person did took incredible courage. This whistleblower works inside the Trump administration. This whistleblower witnessed what was happening. This whistleblower saw administration officials allegedly violating a court order. And this whistleblower made the decision to come forward and report it. Do you understand what that means? This whistleblower is risking their career. They're risking retaliation from Trump and his loyalists. They're risking being labeled a traitor by MAGA world. They're putting themselves in danger to expose what they believe is wrongdoing. And we've already seen what happens to whistleblowers in Trump world. We've seen how Trump and his allies attack them. We've seen how they try to destroy their reputations. We've seen how they try to intimidate them into silence. But this whistleblower came forward anyway. This whistleblower provided evidence to the court. This whistleblower helped Judge Boasberg reach his finding of probable cause for contempt. That is heroic. That is someone putting country over career. That is someone doing the right thing, even when it's dangerous. And now Trump's administration is hiding behind executive privilege to avoid having to answer the whistleblower's allegations under oath. They're blocking the investigation. They're preventing the truth from coming out. Here's what Trump and his allies don't want you to understand about this situation. They're trying to make this sound like some minor procedural dispute. They're trying to claim this is just lawfare against Trump. They're trying to pretend this is no big deal. But let me tell you what this actually is. This is a federal judge finding probable cause that the Trump administration committed contempt of court. This is evidence from a whistleblower that administration officials knowingly violated a court order. This is the Trump administration using executive privilege to block an investigation into their own conduct. And here's what's particularly disturbing. If Judge Boasberg's investigation had been allowed to continue, if the appeals court hadn't stepped in and paused everything, there were going to be consequences. Judge Boasberg was considering sanctions. He was considering fines. He was considering holding individual officials in contempt. There was even discussion of potentially freezing assets of federal agencies that participated in the alleged violation. Those are serious consequences. Those are the kinds of penalties that get imposed when courts believe someone has willfully defied their orders. But right now, all of that is on hold. The investigation is paused. The sanctions haven't been imposed. And Trump's people are hiding behind executive privilege. Now, I want you to step back and look at the bigger picture here, because this case is not happening in isolation. This is part of a pattern with Trump. This is part of a pattern where Trump believes he doesn't have to follow court orders. This is part of a pattern where Trump believes he's above the law. This is part of a pattern where Trump uses every legal maneuver possible to avoid accountability. We saw it with the classified documents case. We saw it with the January 6th investigation. We saw it with the civil fraud trial in New York. And now we're seeing it again with this contempt investigation. Trump's strategy is always the same. Delay, appeal, claim privilege, block investigations, prevent testimony, run out the clock. And unfortunately, it often works. Trump has been incredibly successful at using the legal system to avoid consequences for his actions. But here's the difference this time. This time, there's a whistleblower. This time, there's someone from inside Trump's own administration providing evidence. This time, a federal judge has already found probable cause for contempt. That makes this case different. That makes this case potentially more dangerous for Trump than some of the other legal challenges he's faced. So what happens now? Where does this case go from here? Well, right now, everything is on hold while the appeals court decides whether executive privilege protects Trump administration officials from having to testify. That decision could take weeks or even months. If the appeals court rules that executive privilege does not apply here, if they say Trump's officials do have to testify, then Judge Boasberg's contempt investigation will resume. The hearings will be rescheduled. Trump administration officials will be forced to testify under oath about what they knew and when they knew it. And if the evidence shows that they willfully violated the court order, if the whistleblower's allegations are proven true, then there will be consequences. There will be sanctions. There will be fines. There could even be criminal referrals. But if the appeals court rules that executive privilege does apply, if they say Trump's officials don't have to testify, then this investigation could be effectively killed. The contempt allegations might never be fully investigated. The whistleblower's evidence might never be tested in court. And Trump's people might get away with allegedly violating a federal judge's order. That's the stakes here. That's what we're waiting to find out. Let me be really clear about why this case matters so much. This is about whether a president can simply ignore court orders. This is about whether the executive branch is subject to judicial oversight. This is about whether courts can hold the president and his administration accountable when they allegedly break the law. If Trump's administration can violate a court order, hide behind executive privilege, and face no consequences, then what does that say about the rule of law in America? What does that say about the separation of powers? What does that say about whether anyone can hold the president accountable? These are fundamental constitutional questions. These are questions about the very foundation of our democratic system, and that's why this whistleblower coming forward is so important. That's why Judge Boasberg finding probable cause for contempt is so significant. That's why we need to be paying attention to this case as it develops. Here's the bottom line. A whistleblower came forward with evidence that the Trump administration willfully violated a federal court order. A federal judge found probable cause to believe contempt occurred. The judge scheduled hearings to investigate further. But the Trump administration ran to the appeals court and got the investigation paused by claiming executive privilege. And now everything is on hold while the appeals court decides whether Trump's officials can be forced to testify. This is a major legal case. This is a case about presidential accountability. This is a case about whether courts can check executive power. And we're going to be following this story closely as it develops, because the outcome of this case could have massive implications for Trump's presidency and for the rule of law in America. Make sure you're subscribed to National Brief Network because we're going to keep tracking this case. We're going to break down every ruling as it comes down. We're going to explain what it means and why it matters, because this is the kind of story that doesn't get enough attention in mainstream media. This is the kind of story where you need someone to cut through the noise and explain what's actually happening. That's what we do here. That's why you need to be subscribed. And that's why you need to share this video with everyone you know, because people need to understand what's happening with this case. The whistleblower came forward, the evidence is there, the judge found probable cause, and now we wait to see if Trump's officials will be forced to testify under oath about what they allegedly did. This story is far from over. Stay tuned.